So the Square Foot Gardening Foundation has been around for quite a few years, and we're very happy to be able to offer classes to people in all different abilities of gardening. I'm your certified instructor today. My name is Leslie Caza. And to tell you a little bit about myself, I have always loved gardening. I've read tons of gardening books. I've used a lot of different methods, but nothing compares with square foot gardening. My first exposure was in 2016, where I took a class that somebody was offering, loved it so much, was so impressed that I went ahead and got certified, and haven't looked back since. It's been just incredible. So what is square foot gardening? Well, square foot gardening is a simple, productive gardening system that adapts to all levels of experience. It's great for people of all physical abilities in any geographical location. There's no weeding, no digging, no tilling, no kidding. With square foot gardening, it's estimated that you'll spend about 50% less, use about 20% of the space, 10% of the water, and have 2% of the work compared with single row gardening. And it's natural and organic. It's easy to protect from pests, animals, and weather. It's earth friendly. You will reduce your water consumption. You will reuse your mix. You can recycle materials to build your boxes. So in the next hour, I'm going to teach you how to be an expert gardener. Mel Bartholomew is the originator of the square foot garden. He was an engineer and an efficiency expert who has done PBS programs. Mel had a vision of getting rid of world hunger 1 square foot at a time. He began his method about 40 years ago, and it's been used all over the world. Mel has written multiple books. He's written the Square Foot Gardening book, the Square Foot Answer book, Square Foot Gardening with Kids. There's a cookbook. You can look on Amazon. There's a big variety of books. The current edition is the 3rd edition. So Mel began by taking a gardening class, but he got really discouraged, like most of us do, because of all the weeds. You know, you start with this great vision, and before you know it, you're just overflowing with weeds. So Mel wanted to find out something that would work better than all these weeds. So he started questioning the experts and the farmers. And he started asking them, why do we plant in rows and leave so much space for weeds? Why do we plant a whole packet of seeds only to pull so many of them out and have when we thin them? Why do we waste water on weeds? Why do we walk on the soil and compact it when we've worked so hard to till it up? Well, do you know what answer he got? Because that's the way we've always done it. That's what works for large farm equipment. So why would we use farming methods in the backyard? The answer was tradition. That's just what we've always done. So we had heavy work, tilling, hoeing, and lots of watering. Mel knew there had to be a better way to do this, and so he took his engineering skills and his efficiency mindset, and he got right to work on planning something that would be better for the home gardener. And after much experimenting, he came up with square foot gardening. Now, why have a garden anyway? It helps us to be self-efficient. It also helps us to have nutritious, healthy food. It teaches values like industry, responsibility, perseverance, and teamwork. It also reduces stress because you're out in the fresh air and in the sunshine. You can listen to the birds sing and get away from all the screens. Plus, God put man in the garden to begin with. There had to be a good reason for that. Gardening beautifies the environment. Look at this home. I bet people stop to look at this square foot garden just to see how very beautiful it is. And it allows for creativity. You can design it any way that you like it and express yourself. There's 10 basics of square foot gardening: the layout, boxes, aisles, soil, grid, care, selecting, plants, water, and harvest. So we're going to take each of these one at a time. So the first basic is the layout. We need to think in squares and not in rows. So our boxes might be 3 by 3 or 4 by 4 or 2 by 20. But the average garden size is 20 feet by 35 feet, which is about 700 square feet. With square foot gardening, you only need about 140 square feet to accomplish the same. So here's in my greenhouse when I first started doing them. So you can make these boxes to fit anywhere you want. Learn from my mistake. This was when I first started square foot gardening, and I made them up against the wall 3 feet deep. It's too hard to reach. If you're going to be up against a wall or up against a fence, you only want to have them 2 feet deep. So here I am after the growing season had been going. I absolutely love square foot gardening. You can make the boxes in cool shapes to make it pretty on your porch or your patio. You can make them in pyramids. You can grow herbs in a square foot. Let me give a word here though. If you're growing something that's a perennial, such as oregano or thyme, you want to put that in a container rather than in your box because it will invade the entire box. Now, our locations. Pick an area that will get 6 to 8 hours of sunshine daily. Stay clear of trees and shrubs where roots and shade might interfere with your boxes. Have it close to the house for convenience and for protection. Existing soil is not important. You're not going to be using your existing soil. And lastly, choose an area that is not going to puddle after heavy rain. Here we see a nice sunny spot by somebody's shed. We've got some ground boxes by a play area. Patio boxes, this is on concrete. These can be put out on your deck to beautify your deck, or on a rooftop, or on a balcony. Or you can do them in a desert. You can make them any size you want, 2 by 2, 1 by 1, 4 by 4, 3 by 20, 2 by 50. You can also make them portable so that you can move them as you'd like to move them. You could also put the boxes on wheels. Now the boxes. Build in squares or rectangles. You're going to be using these above ground. You can make them out of wood, out of brick or block, out of vinyl, out of stone, out of bamboo, out of metal. Here we see one that's made in a U shape. Now this is really nice. This might have been for somebody who had back problems or somebody who was in a wheelchair. This would be very easy for them to be able to use. Here we have a his and hers box set of an elderly couple, each with their 3 foot, complete with the trellis. If you're doing something like this up on a table like this, you could just pick up a table at Goodwill, and then in the bottom of your box, if you have a solid piece of plywood or something in the bottom of your box, in each of the 1 square feet, you would put a 1/4 inch hole in the middle of that box, and then 1/4 inch hole in each corner. And by the way, if this is going too fast, this will be recorded and uploaded so you can re-watch the video or you can pick up the book. This will give you a general idea of how square foot gardening works. And with square foot gardening, you only need it to be 6 inches deep. And a lot of people think, really? Well, here's Mel with his granddaughter and her sunflowers, and you can see them growing on the right-hand side in the square foot box. Most people don't believe it can be done, but Mel says it could even be grown in 4 inches of soil, but nobody believes him. So he said, just go ahead and do 6 inches. You don't want your boxes to be any wider than 4 feet so that you always have only a 2 foot area where you need to reach into. So about an arm's length And they found that that's about the average arm length for a person. The boxes can be made out of wood, very simple to make. And then one of the gals who took my classes in her 70s, and she got some of these planter blocks from Home Depot. She didn't even have to use any screws or nails. She just slid them into the grooves and built the boxes that way. That works really great. The one thing you don't want to use if you're using wood is treated boxes because of the chemicals in the treated wood. You only should be painting or staining the outside of the boxes to keep all those chemicals away from your plants. The next thing you want to do after you make your box is to add a weed barrier. Now, I like to get something like a sturdy landscape fabric from Sam's Club or something like that, because the mix is going to last for about 10 years. So you want your weed barrier also to be able to last for 10 years. You can mow the grass low first, and then you can put a good weed barrier down underneath. And then if you don't want to spread it out past the box, then go ahead and bring it up on the inside edges of the box. So here we see a yard that has been all laid out with their block, with their square foot. And then here it is after they're in their growing season. Absolutely beautiful. This is a garden that is not only beautiful to look at, it's easy to maintain as well. You can use cinder block if you wanted. And look at on this, how they're even planting in the little holes of the cinder block. You can use a galvanized steel. I got some of these at Walmart at a closeout at the end of one season. They were wonderful because they were 4x4 and 8 inches deep. So they were perfect for doing the square foot gardening. And here's how I did my layout. Now I like to put the landscape fabric in a big area and then put my grow boxes on top of that, because I don't like any weeds anywhere around my garden. So I'm just very picky. And if you get a good quality landscape fabric, you will not get weeds coming up through your mix. You can also protect your grow boxes from burrowing critters. So if you have moles or voles or gophers or rabbits or prairie dogs or mice or groundhogs in your area, go ahead and put some sort of metal protection or fencing underneath your grow box. And then that would go on top of your weed barrier, and that would keep out weeds and keep out the critters. If you want to grow things that take more than 6 inches of mix, things like potatoes, long carrots, or leeks, you can add what's called a high-rise box. Now that looks like a pretty high-rise box on that. That might be a 10-inch box, but you could just make another 6-inch box or another 8-inch box and just make it to fit over 1 or 2 squares and only fill the mix in that section. You don't need to have the whole grow box being that deep. You only need it that deep for those deeper plants. And here we see one that's just selective of just a few. It looks like they have maybe potatoes growing in that high-rise area where they're going to want to add more soil as they go along. So how many boxes do you need to grow? Well, it's a good idea to start small with 1 or 2 boxes. One 4x4 box will have salad fixings for 1 person for the entire growing season. A second box will supply vegetables for another person for the growing season, and a third box would supply vegetables for storing or for giving away. What can you grow in a grow box? A head of cabbage, a head of broccoli, a head of cauliflower, 4 heads of romaine, 4 heads of red lettuce, 4 heads of salad lettuce, 5 pounds of sugar snap peas, and there's more. 8 bunches of Swiss chard, 9 bunches of spinach, 16 small ball carrots, 16 beets, 4 bunches of beet greens, 16 long carrots, and 32 radishes. Number 3 of the basics is your aisles. Space your boxes about 3 feet apart to form walking ways. They can be made out of grass, bark, gravel, or dirt. Now, the narrow aisle or against a fence, you want to not make your boxes too wide in that because you won't be able to reach if you have a fence in the way. So be considering that in your layout, how wide you need your aisles, and you want to have maybe room for a wheelbarrow, you want to have room to kneel, you want to have it be comfortable for your working. Some different ideas for your aisles. This is a beautiful pea gravel. I'm going to guess they went ahead and put the weed barrier under the gravel as well. You could use mulch with cut logs to walk on. You could use a green indoor-outdoor carpet. Now that does not go underneath the grow boxes. It's only in the walkways. And then if you look in the right-hand corner here, you'll see they've got some of the taller boxes there for growing carrots and things like that, and just made a very beautiful garden here. Or you could just have grass walkways. Now, I personally don't like grass walkways, mainly because if your grass starts growing, you've got to trim around all those boxes. Whereas if you have your landscape fabric extending out and you pin it down around the boxes, then you can just mow and you don't have to worry about things growing up and trimming all around your grow boxes. Now, step 4, this is the most important part of square foot gardening. This is the soil. It's called Mel's Mix. What it's made up of is a third peat moss, a third coarse vermiculite, and a third compost. The soil that you have on your property does not matter. You're not going to be using it. And Mel's Mix, once it's made up, is good for about 10 years. So you make it one time. It's above ground, so you're not using your poor soil. It's loose and friable, which means crumbly. All the nutrients that you need are in the mix, and you only need about 6 inches deep for most crops. The peat moss. Peat moss is a natural material from peat bogs, which is made of decomposting plant materials. This is used to help improve the soil and to help with water retention. Now, in his 3rd edition, Mel also mentions coconut coir, which is a byproduct from the coconut agricultural industry. And this is the short fibers from the coconut coir. They use the long fibers in making rope and stuffing of poultry and for brushes, but the one that you would use in this is a short fiber one, and it comes in a really compact block that greatly expands once it is wet. Also in the 3rd edition, Mel mentions that you can use something called pit moss, which is made from recycled newspaper. Now you can use that instead of the peat moss, but it tends to break down faster. You won't get 10 years out of your mix. So the next part is coarse vermiculite. Now vermiculite is mica rock that has been ground up and heated till it pops like popcorn. And this helps to keep your soil very loose and nice to work with. It also holds water and allows the roots to breathe. So I made a little bit of a picture here. So I have equal amounts of popcorn in these jars. And you can see that with the popcorn by itself is very flat and no spaces, but once it's popped, there's lots of room for air and water. And this is exactly what coarse vermiculite does. It pops up like that and makes all those wonderful nooks and crannies. The last part of our mix is 1/3 compost. So we also use this compost when we are replanting, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. In the compost, you have your nutrients, so you don't need to add Miracle-Gro or anything like that. And you could make your own compost if you're so inclined to do so, or you can purchase bags of compost. Now, if you're going to purchase your compost, we're going to suggest that you use 4 to 5 different types of compost and mix them all together. Maybe you want to get some from the dairy compost, poultry manures. Maybe you want to get some mushroom mulch or some worm castings. Steer manure tends to be a little high in sodium because of what they feed them. So you might want to not use much of that or not use it at all if you can help it, but try to get quality compost that you can mix together. So if you mix, say you needed, well, let me just say that. You just want to make sure that you're mixing different kinds, mix it all together before you measure. So when you're doing 1/3 compost, your 1/3 is actually a mixture of your composts. Don't skimp on that. This is your biggest investment, your Mel's Mix, but it is what will make your square foot garden really thrive. And you're not going to be spending money on rototillers or garden rakes or hose or things like that. The investment in the square foot gardening is actually a one-time 10-year investment, except for the little bit that you'll add each time you replant that a little bit more of the compost, and it will last you for years. So how to make the Mel's Mix. Spread out a large tarp, or you can use a wheelbarrow. We have a very large wheelbarrow that we use. Break up the clumps of the peat moss before you measure. Otherwise, it'll be too dense with peat moss. So as you open up that bag, start crumbling that up. And we measure in 5-gallon buckets. We put a 5-gallon bucket of the peat moss, a 5-gallon bucket of the coarse vermiculite, and a 5-gallon bucket of our compost mix. Let me just go back to the vermiculite for 1 minute. There are different kinds of vermiculite, and you want to make sure you get coarse vermiculite. That is the one that will hold up the best over the years. And then you dump equal portions of the ingredients on the tarp, and then you mix it up. And you might mix it, a couple people just pulling it back and forth. You could put on some long sleeves and some gloves and just get in there and stir it up. It's very lightweight and it's very easy to work with. You could even use a snow shovel if you wanted to mix up your Mel's Mix. Then you can add it into your boxes. As you add it into your boxes, put a layer of 1 inch or so and then wet it. Put another inch and wet it, because this soaks up a ton of water to begin with, and it holds the water well. You will need 8 cubic feet of mix to do 1 4 by 4 by 6 inch box. And your packages of compost and vermiculite and peat moss will all tell you the cubic footage that you have in that package, so you can figure out how much you need. Now the coarse vermiculite, I like to buy that in a 4 cubic foot bag, and we can talk more about that later if you want. All right, the next part is the grid. This is the heart of square foot gardening. It helps you to visualize your planting spaces. It makes each plant space very prominent. It makes your garden unique, and for planting, it is a must. Without the grid, it isn't a square foot garden. So here we have it without the grid and with the grid. Now, when I first started planting in square foot gardening, I was boggled with this. I started to make my rows right away, and then I had to erase my lines and start thinking in the squares again. But now it is so simple. You just go ahead and you put the grid on top of your box. Something sturdy is good, like wood or Venetian blinds, but string, although it works, it tends to break down in the sunlight and tends to get broken. Without the grid, it's not a square foot garden, and you'll be likely reverting to row planting, which is not what we want to do. So we put that grid. Now with the Venetian blinds, the hole where the string goes through, I usually make a wire U-hook out of a clothes hanger, and I will put the U through the hole where the string goes through in the Venetian blind to help secure the Venetian blind down onto the, into the soil. And without the grid, it is not a square foot garden. All right, now care and weeding. There's very few weeds with square foot gardening. There's no weed seeds of the vermiculite or the peat moss, and composting does kill most weed seeds. And you're only going to be watering around the root zones if you water by hand. Your landscape fabric does not allow weeds to come up. So the only weeds that you'll have will be weeds that are blown in through the wind, seeds that are blown in through the wind. And those are easily pulled out because the soil is so soft and crumbly, so soft and friable. They're also easy to identify because they're going to be out of your planting pattern. So you'll know where something pops up, if it's a weed or not, if you're not familiar with what your plants look like. Here's the tools that you will need for gardening. You will need a bucket, you will need a cup, a trowel, some scissors, and maybe a pencil. And that's about it. You're not going to need a big tool shed for your gardening tools. So we've spent a lot of money on rototillers and tools. We always buy quality tools, but with this, you're not going to have a place to store all that heavy equipment, or you won't even need it at all. Now, when you're thinning in your garden, do not pull them out. You just take your scissors and you just snip off those extra little plants, and that way you won't disturb the roots of the plants that you're keeping in your square foot garden. And never walk on your square foot garden. The garden is designed so that you only have to reach in 2 feet at a time. So there's not even any reason to be walking in your garden and packing down all that nice fluffy Mel's mix that you have in your square foot garden. The next part is to select your crops. Grow what you like to eat. You could plant a different flower, vegetable, herb crop in each square. Plant with what you want to harvest. You can stagger the harvest. So if you want to have lettuce over a 6-week period, you could plant 1 or 2 squares, and then 2 weeks later, plant another 1 or 2 squares, and 2 weeks later, plant another 1 or 2 squares, so that you can have a continual harvest. Planting this way also prevents overplanting, and it does not waste water or seeds because you know exactly what you're doing. You're not planting a whole packet of seeds and then thinning down to every 6 inches. You're planting what you need. Number 8 is planting. This method conserves seeds. You just put 1, 2, or 3 seeds in each little hole. Then you might make a small depression around the plant if you're transplanting a plant, and that will be for where you're going to pour your water in if you want to water with a cup. This also helps plant rotation because each square, you only have to think in squares. So once you pull out your green onions in 1 square, you might think, that square is going to have a tomato plant, and you don't have to be thinking big rows, whole garden. You're thinking 1 square at a time. It really simplifies things, and it looks really nice too. The spacing of your square foot, you only have to know how to count 1, 4, 9, or 16. You will know how to space them according to what it says as thin to distance on your seed packet. This will help you to save seeds. So if you're planting 1 per square foot, you will, if it says thin to 12 inches, seeing as you're in a 12 by 12 inch box, you know you can fit 1 plant in there, and that will be things like broccoli, cabbage, tomato, eggplant, and peppers. You just put 1 little dot in the center of your box. If it says 4 per square foot, 4 plants per square foot, that will be on the package where it says thin to 6 inches. And that would be things like leaf lettuce, corn, charge, marigolds, and strawberries. And you would just take your finger and you would go down 1, and you would go across the other way. So you could go zip, zap. Just make an X in your box and then poke, 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 one in each square, and you now have perfect planting distances without ever pulling out anything to measure. Let me get back on here. If the package says thin to 4 inches, it's 4 divided by 12 would mean you'd have 3 per across and down. So you just make that shape with your finger and you'd go zip down, zap across. You now have 9 squares in your box. You can just put your seeds, one in each of those little boxes, and that would be things for bush beans, spinach, and beets. If it says thin to 3 inches apart, you'll now have 4 across and 4 down, and that would be for carrots, radishes, and onions. And with that, you would make your X, zip, zap, make your X in the thing, and then putting 2 fingers down, you'd go 2 in each box. Bing, 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 bing. And you now have 16 planting places for your carrots, radishes, and onions. Here we see a chart, and square foot gardening is very popular. If you go on Pinterest or if you do an internet search, you'll see charts that will tell you exactly how many to plant for each type of plant. But again, you can just read the seed packet and figure out the spacing when you know you're dealing with a 12-inch by 12-inch box. Here's a picture of a little boy with his garden. Look at the diversity. Look at how beautiful this is. He's got his cabbage and he's got his flowers and he looks like he's got maybe a tomato plant in there. Just a beautiful variety in such a small little place. If you want a large harvest, you can plant an entire box all of one crop. So if you wanted to sell something or share something, you could do it all in one. Looks like they've got a pea patch growing there. You could do a flower square foot garden and make it very beautiful like that. Just add some color. You could do one box. You could do all the boxes in flowers, and you can mix up the variety of flowers as well, just to make it really beautiful and make yourself a spring bouquet. Step 9 of our square foot garden basics is watering. Now you can water by hand from a bucket of sun-warmed water, and that would mean just keeping a 5-gallon bucket by your garden, leaving it there. The sun will warm that up, and you just take a cup and pour it in. You can use drip irrigation. You can use a hose, a sprinkler. You do want to keep the soil moist, and you water according to the needs of the plants. You can just feel the soil, or you can get a water meter like this at Walmart or Amazon or something. You just stick it in the ground, and it will tell you how your plants are doing if you're nervous about knowing when to water. So here we have a picture of the bucket method, where you would just keep your bucket there and pour one water into around the root area of the plant. You could water with a hose or with a sprayer on the hose. You can use the drip irrigation system. Now our last one is harvesting. This is our fun one, right? This is what we want to be getting to. Harvest and replant. There is a potential for 3 crops each year in each square foot. When you pull out one plant, what you do is you take your little garden trowel and you put in 1 scoop of your nice mixed compost into each square, stir it up a little bit, and replant. That's it. And you want to rotate your crops. So you'll have in each square, you might go root crop like a carrot, to a fruit crop like a tomato, to a leaf crop like spinach. And it's very easy to do crop rotation because you're thinking 1 square at a time. And by not having a large variety and by having a large variety in one small area, that also helps with pest control. When you have a lot of the same plants all in one area, you're going to attract the pests that like those crops. So this does help some reduce with the pest problem. So here we've got a harvest that has been picked from this garden. And you can take some scissors with you to the garden and you can snip off some of that basil, or you can snip off some of that spinach and leave the plants in the ground to continue growing. Now, if you don't have a lot of space for the plants to climb, with square foot gardening, it's very popular to use trellising, growing up, where you just every week you'd go out to your garden and just see what's growing and weave it through your trellising material that you have up. Making your vertical frame, you can use electrical conduit or other sturdy material because your plants are going to be heavy, especially if you're doing things like melons or tomatoes. You can use elbow couplings on the corners, some rebar. You can see the man on the left-hand side, he's banged the rebar into the ground and then he's slipping the conduit pipe over that rebar. And then you have your netting as well. Place your frame on the north side of your box so that you can get the best sunlight on your box. If you grow it on the wrong side, then you're going to miss some of that early morning sunlight when your trellises are full like that. Here's some of my cucumbers growing on a trellis. I found that by growing my cucumbers on a trellis like that, number one, they're straighter, but also I got less rotting from them being on the ground. I wasn't stepping on them as much. And of course, I didn't have to weed around cucumber vines either because they were growing up and the Mel's Mix doesn't have weeds growing in it. You could also trellis with bamboo poles. You could use this cattle fencing, and as your melons get really heavy, you might even want to make a sling for them, although I've never found that necessary. Probably with heavier things like watermelons, you might want to do that. But if they grow like that, it seems like it does, it seems like the vine gets stronger to accommodate for the plant, but it's not a bad idea to add a sling if it starts to get really heavy, just in case. You can also do slanting trellising like this if you're growing peas or other vining beans or peas like that. Now with your tomatoes, here we see on the left a tomato plant that is being trellised. One of the things that you want to do is prune your tomato plants. That helps the energy from the plant go into the stem and into the fruit rather than to produce a ton of green or too much fruit. So this also helps promote ripening. So if you go down once a week and you look at your tomatoes, you can see on the right, if you have a crotch growing where you have your main stem and a plant, and then you have this little plant growing up in the crotch of that, that's what you want to pinch off or snip with your scissors. This helps your plants to stay better aerated, so you're not as likely to get funguses or molds on that. It also seems, at least in my garden, it seems like it made my tomato plants less crowded so that the birds could see the insect pests and eat the insects more easily. And this is my box. I think this was last summer. So you can see I've got some basil growing in there. Then I've got some cantaloupes growing out, the vining out the front. And then I had tomatoes on the back section of my square foot gardening box. And here's a backside view of that. These are unripe cantaloupes right here. Okay, extending the growing season. You can start earlier in the spring, garden later in the fall. You can protect your plants from cold temperatures. In the hot climate, you can protect your plants better from the heat, and you can protect your plants from animals. It's much easier to do with a square foot garden. So our seasonal crops for the cool weather would be lettuce, peas, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, radishes, spinach, and other greens. Now I live in Tennessee and I start my cool weather crops around the beginning of August, and I can be picking broccoli, beautiful broccoli and kale and other winter crops in the fall, well into the winter time. Even on the outdoor crops that are not in my greenhouse, I can pick broccoli in December. Hot weather crops would be things like tomatoes, beans, squash, corn, Swiss chard, cucumbers, and melons. Let me back up one. On the winter crops or the cool weather crops, you can also grow pea shoots, which are very nice in salad. So you would plant your whole peas, and when they're just maybe 3 inches tall, you can snip them off and put them in your salad, and it tastes like fresh peas in your salad. and you don't have to wait for them to get really big, and you can have a nice amount of variety, a nice variety of greens in your salad. The square foot gardening, you're able to start earlier. There's no tilling, so you don't have to wait for the ground to thaw or to get mushy. We've had such a wet spring this year, and I've been able to get into the garden, my square foot garden, way before I can get into my in-ground garden. It's easier to warm up the soil. You could put something black over it if you wanted, or just because it's up, it tends to warm up faster. All you need to do is add that trowel full of compost into each square, mix it in, and you're ready to plant. And then protect as needed. So if it needs to be protected from the cool weather, just go ahead and throw some plastic over it, or an empty milk jug, cut out the bottom. There's various ways that you can protect. So here we see some starting early. They up in the right-hand side, they've started warming up the boxes with a black sheet plastic over it to start warming it, or you could put a glass frame over the top and make a hot box there. Or you could make a frame by putting bent PVC either inside of the corners of the box, or again, you could put rebar nailed in on the outside of the box, and then put the PVC pipe, and I usually get 3/4 inch PVC pipe, bend that over and put it over the rebar, secure it on the top as you see in this metal picture here, and then just cover it with some plastic. It's amazing how warm it can stay in there. You can do that on your patio boxes. You can use it for warm, with the plastic you can use to start warming it up during the day. Sometimes it gets so hot in there, you've got to uncover it or at least vent it somehow. You could also use those frames to cover with a blanket or a tarp at night if it's going to be incredibly cold. Here we see some frames that are meant so that snow and rain can run off better. Now here's what we did one year at home. We used the PVC in the ground, then we made hoops with the 3/4 inch PVC, and then we covered that and made ourselves a mini greenhouse, and then we just put the, you could put the grow box right inside like that, or for starting your plants. And then if it gets too hot, you can always put something over it to protect your plants from heat. If you have crops like here, we see lettuce that maybe after it's transplanted does not like to have intense heat for the first day or so. And then the ultimate is my greenhouse, which I put my square foot boxes in my greenhouse, and it absolutely works wonderful. And you can see in this picture that I've got many 6-inch tall boxes, but at the end here, I have a 12-inch deep box for growing things like carrots and potatoes, but you can see I'm storing things on that right now. I didn't have anything in there at that time. Now you could also just protect a single square by putting a cloche over it, or you could, again, take a gallon water jug, cut out the bottom, and set that on top of your plants to protect. Now, if you have critters above ground, it's easy to make protection as well, to protect from cats or dogs or squirrels or rabbits. You can use deer netting, something like this, all around the edge, which would be easy to lift off if you put it in a frame. And if you have birds that bother your stuff, you can add a roof onto the top of that. This person needed double duty, probably from rabbits and birds. But it's so much easier to do this than to protect a whole large garden where the deer just jump in the middle and have a heyday. Another picture here of that. So, ideas for families. If you start the children when they're young, they will learn to love to square foot garden, and you can even make them their own little sandbox so they can play in the garden while you work in the garden. What kids grow, they usually learned to eat, so it's a good way to get them to eat their vegetables. Square foot gardening is great for all ages, from 4 to 94, because it's so simple to do, and you can adjust the height for all health abilities or inabilities, such as this. Special needs groups can learn how to use square foot gardening because it's so simple to work with. They've used it in school gardenings to teach math and other subjects. You can use it for science projects. Utah State Prison has offered this in their prison system. And here you can see the layout of the grid. And what that is actually a picture of is not of the box itself, but for your planting. If you're planting in the 4, 9, or 16 pattern. Now, square foot gardening has been used around the world. They've used it in Iraq, in India, in Guatemala, in Sri Lanka, in Belize, in Africa. Look at how creative they had to get. In Bermuda. Here's in my greenhouse. Here's a lady who took a class from me a few years ago, and she put a few boxes in and absolutely loved it. Then she got married, and he said, we need more of these boxes. So they put in more boxes, and then she sent me some pictures of her boxes growing and some of her produce. And I just loved it. It's got some beautiful basil and melons there and tomatoes there. If you need more information on square foot gardening, you can check out squarefootgardening.org. There's also some Facebook page. Pinterest has things. You can look up YouTube videos.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.